Welcome to an open heart conversation presented by Choe Khor Sum Ling in Bangalore. I am here with Aman, who's the director of CKSL, and our very special guest is Geshe Tenzin Namdak, one of the founding trustees and teacher of CKSL. Geshe Namdak began studying Buddhism at Maitreya Institute in the Netherlands in 1993, and then after graduating from university with a degree in hydrology and working for the government on an environmental project, he took ordination from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He was the first Westerner to complete the Geshe program at Sarajay, and followed by the traditional one-year Vajrayana study program at Gyurme Tantric College. Geshe Namdak has devoted his life to study and service. To relate just a few things, he was the founding teacher of Sarajay's translator program, and he was involved in the construction and management of Shedrup Sungdra Ling, the house for Western monks studying at Sarajay. Currently, he's the resident teacher at Jamyang Buddhist Center in London, and he also teaches at other centers in Europe and India. Before we begin, as we understand that even virtuous activities like this one conversation, if not motivated by the wish to achieve enlightenment, will not create the causes, would you please start us off with an aspiration?
Okay, so we're going to talk about a few things related with the spiritual path and related probably also with our own development in that direction. So it's always important to have the correct motivation, and we can think about to change our mind, to change our life in a positive direction, to become a better human being, so to say, to accomplish more happiness, and not only for yourself, but also for others. So because the material we're going to discuss is in that direction, so try also to have a motivation in those lines. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Geshe. Geshe, so the first question before asking the first question, I just wanted to ask you a quick question about the COVID situation in India. I mean, the students in Bangalore and the people in India would love to hear your advice for people suffering because of COVID, and just maybe your message, a short message. There's some words that you could share with us.
Yeah. I mean, every aspect of suffering, if it's, the suffering of suffering as we experiencing right now, or the suffering of change, or those who know about the pervasive compounding form of suffering, it's kind of, in one way, it's sad, and we have to deal with the issues and try to do our best to help others as well. But also mentally, we have to know how to react, right? So that means that whatever difficulty you encounter in life, the amount of suffering we experience also depends on our mental attitude. So for a Buddhist practitioner or interest in the Buddhist practice, you can think in different ways, right? Nothing is fixed in our life, and things come and go, and sometimes you have more difficulties than other times, and that means that at the moment we're facing difficulties, but that also will come to an end. And if you're facing difficulties, instead of just getting irritated about it, or it's a kind of aspect of life that we cannot really do much about it, other than helping what is within our capacity, right? But we cannot solve the whole problem just by from one day to the other. So in that regard, we should just think that if you cannot really solve something like this, then also there's no point in worrying about too much. Right? And if you see it in the context, because we grasp to things always being there, kind of permanence, or everything is always the same, and that's not only in India, that's everywhere on the planet, that we talk everything will be fine and we have everything under control, but now actually we see it's not like that, so that gives us a teaching about impermanent nature of reality, and that helps us to solve more problems and to work together. So there are also positive things. We can think about it instead of only the negative aspects. Of course, it's very sad what happens, and I'm also thinking a lot about India because I spent half my lifetime in the country, and I miss India sometimes as well. And I have a lot of friends in Bangalore and other places in the country, and I also feel really sad sometimes about what's happening at the moment. But that by itself will not really help us to get mental peace, right? So, and it's not going to solve the problem either. So in that way, we try to see it as an opportunity to think that our existence is not always permanent, and it's momentary changing, and we can face these kind of obstacles in life, and that's a part of our reality and part of life. And if you see it in that way, it gives you the acceptance, right? If there's acceptance, then there's less mental distress, so to say. So those who have studied the Buddha Dharma a bit more, they can see the part of the Dharmic practice of law of cause and effect. You know, that we have this underlying causes to meet these kind of situations, and then sometimes we meet them, and then that's an aspect of what we call samsaric suffering, right? So that's an aspect of our existence that's an underlying cause of that is karma and afflictions. And if you see it in that way, then there's more acceptance and more inclination to walk towards a state beyond karma and afflictions. So it's an aspect to contemplate suffering. And well, we see the suffering of suffering, but the underlying aspect is this kind of all pervasive compounding form of suffering. So if you think in those lines, then at least mentally we can deal with it a little bit better, maybe, like more acceptance and more understanding of why it's happening, because that's often kind of an issue, right, with these kind of circumstances, and seeing that our life is not that fixed all the time and we're not in control. And that brings us also to think about others more than only yourself, because that brings the planet together, right? That brings the people in the country together facing the same problem, and we have to solve it together. And that's also related with environmental kind of issues that are going on, and that we have to do it as one particular family of this place, the earth, we have together. You know? So in that way, it also brings an opportunity to strive together to solve the problem. And things won't be solved straight away, and there's a lot of obstacles in solving these kind of issues. And that's also an aspect of this kind of samsaric system we're in, and that helps us to contemplate those points and try to generate kind of compassion for those who are in the difficulties, and try to help whatever we can and make strong prayers for those people to be free of suffering, not only the COVID, but free of suffering, all types of difficulties in life and suffering created by karma and afflictions. Yeah, so there's kind of mind training we can deal with, or we can try to think about. Yeah.
Thank you, Geshe. Geshe, the first question officially was that something that we do with all our guests. We ask them, which is that we know about you. We've heard your stories. We've read all your blogs, and we've heard your stories from our friends. Your story of how you discovered Buddhism, how you ventured into the path, how you left the path of a layman to become a Geshe now. Could you share some bits of your stories with us, Geshe, your story of discovering Buddhism and then devoting your life to it?
Yeah, I mean, I was just like probably any other university student initially, and I had a little bit of interest in martial arts. So I went from hardcore taekwondo with this kind of heavy kind of duty martial arts, and then I went to kung fu and then tai chi. So it was a kind of movement from physical intensity to more spiritual or mental kind of thinking about things. So then I started thinking about the philosophy behind it. Yeah, and the philosophy behind it brought me to more aspects of the spiritual part, so to say. And then I went into one conference, so to say, with different speakers. And the talk was about mental body and mind, kind of as a subject. And in that period of spirituality, before I went to this conference, then I already gave up the aspect of going to parties. I used to be quite active when I was 18, 19 in these rave parties, mainly in Rotterdam, a big city in the Netherlands. And so when I was in my early 20s, I stopped going to those parties because I was more interested in these underlying aspects of spirituality. Because I saw, even if you enjoy yourself in these parties, it's not really the real, real sustainable form of happiness, you know. So I was looking for maybe there's something more, and that I found in this aspect of Chinese medicine after having done martial arts. And I did it for 2 years in the weekends instead of hanging out in the parties. And then I went to this conference, as I just said, and there was one speaker. It was my first teacher, Geshe from Maitreya Institute in the Netherlands. And that talk made a big impression on me. And the first thing that came to my mind, I have to find out where this center is. In those days, there was no internet, as we have now. So I looked at the stand they had there and took their brochure and was reading, and then they started a 5-year program. A few months later, I thought that's what I have to do. So it just came to my mind. It's a kind of calming connection, maybe, I'm not sure. But then I went to that center, and that one weekend, January 1993, that weekend changed my life. Meaning, I didn't really know I was looking for something, but I found it already. Kind of a coming home kind of thing. And then I started thinking, attending one weekend a month, more or less, at that center. And within 3 months' time, then I want to become a monk, because I thought this is the only way I want to live my life. I just finished finishing university. And then Geshe told me, you're too quick, take your time. And you study 1 year, at least stay at the center for a year, you study and we talk again. So that's what I did. Then I did this research for the government in a city close by, in an environmental kind of increase biodiversity in a particular area because of the hydrology background. So that's what I did. I lived one year at the center, studied a bit more, and then talked with Geshe. And then Geshe said, okay, if you want to become a monk, then what do you want to do? Where do you want to stay? He gave me more questions than answers, so to say. So then I followed that and asked a few other of my teachers for advice, had a look in India, and then came down to following advice of Lama Zopa Rinpoche also to go and study in Serra in South India. That was the idea. So I did 1 year language in Dharamshala, it's in the north. And then I entered in 1997 in this 20-year program in Serra. And also during that program, you can imagine, it's 20 years, so sometimes you have your doubts. So I also had that, and then, but that always came to my mind, what else? If you're really into spirituality, especially a tradition like this, then you think, what else is more beneficial than what I'm doing now? And then I went to my teachers, and they gave always this incredible, vast advice. You study for the best way you can, you put it into practice the best way you can. You do it for a few lifetimes, and then the realizations will come. So that's a kind of a very vast vision advice in relation with other questions that will come up today. Give me a lot of kind of confidence in just keep going. And I was planning after 14 years of the study to go in retreat, long time retreat, and then also my teachers didn't let me go. And I'm now very happy because we're very short-sighted as a Westerner. Especially I was saying, and we only look at very short periods of time. We cannot look at the complete picture, So then, thanks to their advice, I stayed, and then after that went to Gyume Tantric College as well. And now I look back, and then I see, wow, that's very amazing, And then I went to a few of my other teachers, including Kanchi Rinpoche, and then I told him about how amazing it was. He said, you see. So it's quite, So that's a little bit of my my story in short, I think. Yeah.
I guess my question is next. Could you please talk a little bit about the way cultural tradition and the Buddhist teachings get mixed together in Buddhism, and how can we tease out the Buddhist teachings from the cultural traditions in a way that aids our practice without need of complicating it?
Yeah. I mean, there are aspects in every religion or every form of faith, certain culturally related and certain things only, talking about the traditional spiritual tradition, right? So in Buddhism, same thing. And also in Tibetan Buddhism, same thing, that certain aspects are culture related. Also in a monastic environment, we see that. And as a Westerner, sometimes it's a bit difficult, because we have a different background and to go with the flow of a system that is based on Tibetan culture, including the butter tea, is sometimes quite a challenge, So you see that certain aspects within every tradition has cultural related things as well. But there's a kind of a view also in the West that some people think, I don't want to do it Tibetan way, it's not that, because one aspect is that the origin of the teachings or the origin of the Nalanda tradition has been preserved by the Tibetans in this way. Of course, there are a few very small culture related things, but the essence of the teachings, we cannot really change, right? Because the essential teachings of the mind of a Tibetan or the mind of us is very similar. Of course, there are differences based on culture, but our emotions, our nature and states of mind are exactly the same, right? So that's the teachings of the Buddha, same thing. But there's different cultural things, like, for example, making offerings with water balls, something simple like that. In the early days, they used this kind of, metal balls or copper balls. So in the West, we don't have to use, we can use like beautiful kind of glass balls or something like that, right? So there are culture-related things. But when it comes to the mind and the science of the mind, which is the essential aspect of the teachings of the Buddha, then there's nothing to be changed or needed to be changed, because it's extremely profound. And it works as well for Western mind as a mind of a Tibetan or a mind of an Indian, right? So that's because our mind is the same, right? We all want happiness, don't want suffering. How we create happiness and suffering, those causes are the same. Yeah, so that is not really something to be changed, yeah, or cannot change, because there's no point, yeah. And then you miss out, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Geshe. Geshe, the next question, which is something which I find with many students, including that has happened with me also, is that there is a tendency to get burnt out while studying Dharma, which is that one of the reasons that it happens is that you come to Buddhism and you are fascinated with it. You find that this is the way to go. But then you realize that the effort involved in it and the goal is maybe lifetimes away. Maybe you get discouraged and you're neither in the materialistic world and neither in the Buddhist world. So you are just treading this path of somewhere in between, which invites more confusion, more suffering, and eventually just burnout.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Geshe, what do you think could be the advice for
I mean, I often say relax. That's been one of the main things in life, because if you're not relaxed, then the mind is not at peace, right? If the mind is not at peace, then you can't think clearly and you don't make progress, you know. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche often indicates similar things, like people are too busy and not relaxed. And if you're too busy and want to do things too quickly, you never accomplish anything. And that's the kind of strife I can see among Western Buddhists and in India and in modern society, very similar to the West. You have probably similar things as you mentioned yourself, is we have so many expectations and we want to do things quick and soon, you know. We're very short-sighted, as I just indicated from my own point of view. And if you're very short-sighted, then that can cause obstacles, right? So what I said, one of my own teachers, Ganti Rinpoche, said, you know, you do your best, right? You try, you study the best way you can, you try to put it into practice the best way you can, and you keep doing that with pleasure. Then things will happen, you know. So in the Kadam tradition, there's this kind of incredible advice, you know, vast visions, meaning that also helps. If you have a vast vision all the way up to enlightenment, then problems we face, including COVID for a few years, is not that big as the whole picture of countless lifetimes, right? So in that regard, then vast visions helps us a lot to ease down and relax. So if you think, okay, that's my goal, I'm not going to be able to change my mind within a few weeks or a few months or a few years, but I make progress over time because I create the causes for that progress. You know? So that gives you kind of more bigger view of your approach of spiritual path. So that's kind of an aspect of vast vision. That's the first advice of the, you know, of one of these Kadam kind of teachings. Then the second one is you make plans, right? You make a plan to study a particular program or a text or your life. You say, okay, I have to be realistic. I have a job and I want to do this in my free time and I don't want to stress myself. So I do kind of, you know, 50-50 or 80-20 or whatever is possible within your capacity. Right? And then accept that, because we have to be realistic and we cannot live like Milarepa. You know, if you can live like Milarepa, then no worries, then you go off. But if you cannot do that, then you have to be realistic, right? We have a family, we have a job, and then you do 50-50. Or the most important thing is to make these plans. Okay, that's what I'm going to do, and that's it, and be satisfied with that, you know. And then within that program or project, is not time that's an issue, but the mind and our way of contemplating things, even when you have a job, the way you keep thinking about the things you're studying, whenever you have some free time, or relax every hour, just for a few minutes, right? When you have a job or you have working on a project, we easily engage in the project, and we don't take breaks. And even from a common Western psychology point of view, is kind of, if you don't take every break every 45 minutes in every job, you're going to be stressed. And now we see with Zoom, there's some interesting research been done with people who do Zoom meetings back to back, and they stress out, right? So you need breaks, you know. And as with Dharma practice, also the case. You know? That means you make a plan, and according to the plan, you take breaks. Sometimes, you know, you relax and don't do anything of Dharma, or don't do anything of spirituality, and just relax, hang out with some friends or whatsoever, right? That's important, because we have to be realistic. We're not that like Milarepa, right? So we have to know our own needs, you know. So that's making plans, you know, be realistic and make plans, and don't, and then that's related to advice number 3, don't squeeze yourself, you know, don't push yourself beyond your limits. And that's, I find that advice very helpful, because the vast vision let us see that we don't want to accomplish too much. We don't have too many expectations on the short term, right? This is very, very powerful. Yeah? So you're much more relaxed. As you see, His Holiness, same thing. They think about His vast visions, lifetimes, right? If you think in lifetimes, then whatever obstacle you face for a few years is not a big deal, because you move on, and 2 or 3 years within, you know, lifetimes is nothing, right? So this vast vision helps a lot, in every problem we're facing. Yeah. And then, of course, you make some plans, and according to your own capacity and interest and capacity and possibilities, you just fill on your life, and that you have to accept, you know. And then you don't have to worry, because you create the causes, and you make prayers, you create the causes to do more and more and more in the future, in stages, right? We say gradual stages of the path to enlightenment. So we cannot push ourselves, and that's exactly with the last point, is don't squeeze yourself, relax. Because if the mind is not relaxed, you cannot think properly, you cannot meditate properly, you're going to stress out, and get the opposite effect. And that's nothing to do with Buddhism, right? Yeah.
I think in the answer to that question, there's also embedded the answer to the next question. What have been the most valuable lessons that you've learned living in a monastic community that lay people might use learning to work together at Dharma centers, as well as in our jobs? Yeah.
So what I learned in the monastery, I learned a lot of texts, right? You see an amazing, fortunate amount of teachings, very precious, you know, which by itself, people make a distinction between study and practice or something like that. It's not like that. If you study a text and you think about it, it's meditation. Right? So that I learned quite a bit. I'm not a meditator, I'm not a scholar, but you learn how to put it in your life. You know, this kind of teachings you study, how to think about it. There's one aspect I think is very helpful. If you read a book, then you think about it and you read slowly. You know, don't rush and want to finish because you have to study this or study that, because then it doesn't go in, right? It doesn't sink in. So you have to slowly read, think about it, and it becomes a contemplation as well. So that's very beneficial. That's one aspect I learned. You learn how to study. You study for 20 years, then you more or less learn how to read the text, right? There's one aspect. Another aspect I found very helpful is living in a community with Tibetans who actually not every Tibetan is perfect, not every Indian is perfect, not every Western is perfect, but in general, we can see that the majority is living their tradition, right? So that means that Tibetans are very good in teasing others. Westerners, we are a bit uptight, right? So they know how to go to the edge. My roommate was very good. My classmate was very good like that. And they say, if you get irritated, they say, oh, you're almost like getting angry, you know? And they tease each other like, oh, if you have a big nose, or, you know, if you're bald or you're fat, they tease each other like that. You know, one of my classmates, I always use that example. He was quite, a bit fat, overweight. So when you sit down after the debate for the prayers, then my other classmate, who was a bit bald, he said, "Oh, earthquake," to show he's overweight, right? And then my classmate was overweight. They looked at him and looked at his head, and it was shining because of the light. He didn't have much hair. So then he said, "Oh," and then we do this mandala offering in the Tibetan tradition. So then it's kind of a copper plate with this shiny, So then he did on top of it, said, "Oh, Zingam Bilwagyo." So to show him, okay, I'm fat, but you are bald, But there's no you can see there's no intention to harm at all. It's just joking aside and joking about and teasing each other. And sometimes, if a person gets annoyed by something, they say, "Oh, look, he's getting angry." So you're the center of attention. And if people the eye comes up, they say, "Oh, look, where's the eye?" So they play around with these aspects of mind training, which is not easy for a Westerner in the beginning, but very beneficial in the long term. So when we engage in discussions, for example, in the West or in India, and it's very easy to get uptight in views and discussing things, and that's not very constructive at all. So if you look at this kind of way, how we play in debate, how we, let this example with two of my classmates like this, how we make jokes about each other in a very healthy kind of atmosphere without harmful intent, right? And then when we went to debate, then, Kensei Rinpoche Lobsang Delek, for example, and Lobsang Tsering in the early days, when they were been so fortunate to receive classes from them, then they say, "Enjoy the debate, have fun," So if you're in that way, then there's no possibility for competition or anger or your own view or irritations. "Oh, this person doesn't understand it, and it's like this, and it's like that." That doesn't arise, right? So in that way, if you're more relaxed and open to other views, and that's what happens in debate as well, because we have only one mind, and one mind is only a certain amount of reasoning that's possible, right? So in discussion with others, you can learn so much from others, right? So just put your own view aside and then hear other opinions and then think about it and discuss. So that's, I learned a lot in the debate style and in the monastery, this kind of, easygoing approach, go with the flow and let go of this I, so to say. That's very helpful. Yeah, it was very helpful. Yeah.
Thank you, Geshe. Geshe, the next question that I wanted to ask you was on dukkha, suffering, unsatisfactoriness. So of the three types of suffering, personally, the first and second one seems kind of more clear than the third one, the all-pervasive suffering.
Yeah, correct.
And as I started meditating and contemplating, this third suffering became a bigger beast than the first and the second one. And I realized that the more I meditate, the more this all-pervasive suffering becomes more and more clear, like it's there. And then it seems like just the hope for happiness seems like the major trouble, because the all-pervasive suffering doesn't seem to be going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels like, okay, should I give up the hope for happiness? Because this all-pervasive suffering is literally all-pervasive. Mm-hmm. It's also pervading my best and the most pleasurable experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if I give up this hope for happiness, then it feels like, why am I meditating? Why am I studying? So so there's always this mental games that you play. So, okay, just do it. Forget it, just do it. And I just wanted to discuss that thought with you. Where do you think I'm going wrong, or where do you think we are going right?
So actually, the unsatisfactory nature or the happiness we experience is kind of a contaminated form of happiness, right? And this contaminated form of happiness is actually an illustration of the change of suffering, the suffering of change, right? So that means that whatever happiness we experience is caused by karma and afflictions. Yeah. So that means that our happiness we experience is never given satisfaction because we always have too many expectations. We never meet our expectations. And that's based on what we say, a contaminated aspect of attachment, right? We see if we do this or have this object or engage with this kind of activity, then we think, oh, that will be amazing, that we be it. And then we have too many expectations, which is not in accordance with reality. We build up this mental image of that particular object of desire whatsoever. And that mental image is not the object. is our mental creation, right? And we think that that mental creation is the object, and that causes the problem. Because when we meet that object, then that reality is not met. And then there's no satisfaction, right? So that's one aspect of your question. The other aspect of the question is the all pervasive compounding form of suffering is true. It's the most difficult one to be understood. Yeah? That means whatever we do, as long as we have karma and afflictions, we bound in this cycle, right? There's no non-contaminated happiness. So what happiness you're looking for is a happiness that is only can be generated when you're free of karma and afflictions, right? Or when you have a kind of, direct perception of emptiness that's also been considered as a non-contaminated state of mind, right? So that means the real happiness we're looking for is not a happiness within samsaric suffering, but is a happiness for liberation and enlightenment on the long term, right? But in order to accomplish that, it's going to take time. And that's why, regarding to one of the previous questions, is have to have this relaxed attitude. And of course, we have to try to, enjoy some kind of temporary happiness now then, because that's how, at a moment, our contaminated kind of state needs to function. We need sometimes a break, right? We need sometimes to relax. We need sometimes to go for a walk. We don't have to need those things without our capacities, because we're not like Milarepa, right? So that means that those temporary happiness, we can go for that, but we should always, in the back of our mind, know, okay, this is not ultimate happiness, just for a temporary kind of purpose, right? So then the picture of what is real happiness, the ultimate happiness, liberation, and enlightenment, we strive for. Yeah? But temporarily, we also have to experience certain form of happiness in order to keep going, right? There's a skillful means. Yeah. So, and we can enjoy it. You can enjoy a meal, or you can enjoy a conversation, or whatsoever, knowing it's not the real cause of happiness, but on a temporary level, there's some benefit, right? So then, yeah. And then eventually, think about this all-pervasive compounding form of suffering, which is the most difficult type to be understood, that really see that everything is rooted in karma and afflictions, right? That our minds, our activities, all the negative things we do or experience come from these destructive emotions. Yeah? So whatever physical or verbal thing we do is rooted in mental activity. And if that mental activity is mixed with these destructive emotions, then the outcome is also not very positive in most cases, right? Yeah. So then we can see the destructive emotions like anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, anxiety, fear. They cause a kind of disturbance of mind, right? And those destructive emotions are not an innate part of the mind. They're not in constant reality, as we just saw, right? So with a correct form of understanding of reality and constructive forms of thinking, we can transform our mind and experience much more stable form of happiness on the long term. Yeah, so that's what we try to strive for. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, in the West, there seems to be a culture of extremes with respect to most things, but with respect to entering the Tantrayana practices. So many students get so enthusiastic and they go and gather many empowerment, then they cannot possibly fulfill those obligations. And then there are others who, despite the steady encouragement of our teachers, are really hesitant to step into that. So how would you introduce new students to the difference between the paths of Sutra and Tantra and how together they become the most powerful? What mental milestones might there be for a student of the Lamrim to achieve before considering entering the Tantrayana practice?
I mean, what I said before, this kind of one aspect of this vast vision is kind of, eventually, of course, you have to study a bit more, and you have to enter these kind of paths of Sutra as well as Tantra in order to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. But also we have to be realistic, and then we have to make plans and see what's possible being in our own capacity at the moment. Yeah, we are not yogis yet. Yeah, so that means that we have to see according to time, according to our mental capacities, what we can and cannot do. So in the beginning, don't rush into Tantra. Yeah, that's because even if you rush into Tantra, if you don't have the fundamental basis of the Lam Rim is not going to produce any results other than some good imprints in the mind, right? So eventually we have to produce realizations. Yeah. So those realizations are built in stages. That's why we have a gradual path. Yeah? So we start with a good understanding of the Lam Rim, and then later on, when you feel inspired to do so, then you can check if you're interested in Tantra, then check if there's a teacher you have a connection with, because it's very important, as we know. Yeah, it's always very important to check the teacher, even in the Lam Rim. Analyze if you have a connection or not, if the person has qualifications or not, if you feel some benefit in thinking about things when that particular teacher talks about things. So in that regard, you have to check the teacher. And with Vajrayana, even more important. Yeah, so you don't rush. When I was young and also just in Buddhism, I remember there were some initiations and I want to get this already, but then I took a few steps back. I said, I don't have connection with this teacher yet. I wait. And in the monastery, it's the same thing. There's so many teachings going on. And sometimes you just don't feel a connection yet with a particular teacher, although from the teacher point of view, it has all the qualifications. And there's a huge amount of disciples who are very impressive, So, but then from your side, you don't feel the connection yet, right? So you take your time. That's sometimes also, I didn't take a new teacher at a particular time. I was 1 year in the studies. One teacher, resigned because he was, too old to start to teach anymore. Another teacher went to become an abbot in Gyume. So also one period of time, I was without a teacher for half of the year because I didn't feel ready to take another one at that time. Yeah, so you take your time. You can still study things. Yeah? So that's the general advice of teacher. Then later on, when you feel comfortable, then you start to practice the relation with the teacher in the Sutrayana, in the Lam Rim, right? And then later on, when you really get into seeing the benefits of studying the Vajrayana, then same thing again. You have to have a connection with the teacher. And also when he gives an initiation or whatsoever, check what are the commitments. Yeah, and these days it's all quite clearly set out, and then see what you can and cannot do. You be realistic, don't push. And especially in the beginning, don't take too many commitments and try to do the commitments you have properly. That's very important, And then later on, of course, it has great benefits to go in that direction if you're prepared. Same if you're mid-flight and you with a co-pilot in kind of one of those, fighter jets, and then you never flew a jet like that before, and in the mid-air, then the co-pilot tells you, hey, why don't you take over? If you don't know how to fly, it has become a disaster, right? So same with the Vajrayana. If you don't know how to use those methods, then it's going to create obstacles instead of benefits. So you have to be careful. But if you can do it, then it can bring incredible kind of benefits. And then abiding in the morality, because that's very important, as we know, in the Bodhisattva vows and the vows for self-liberation and the vows for the Vajrayana. That's very important. Right? But take it step by step. That's and try to enjoy the things you have. And even if you have commitments, try to enjoy doing that. And try to see how fortunate it is, because some people think, commitments, it's true, there are now no freedom anymore, but the commitments actually gives us the support, right? So this kind of commitments we get the support to do things on a daily basis, so that's in one way very fortunate. And that's also the purpose of commitments, to make sure you keep on the same track. You don't get lost anymore, right? But before taking that step, it's important to, check and take it easy and one step at a time. Yeah.
Thank you, Geshe. Geshe, we are towards the end of this conversation. This is my last question.
Okay.
Geshe, you mentioned about that take a break, relax, enjoy that temporary happiness. There's also a tendency to maybe overindulge in this temporary happiness again, that you forget the ultimate happiness because you're like, okay, it's easy, let's enjoy this. Yeah. Geshe, if you want to give one advice to people who are listening, because many of us are beginners in Dharma, if you want to give us one advice so that we can put sustained effort, repeated effort again and again, what do you think that advice would be?
Yeah, the middle way approach, right? Is the Buddha. the string of the guitar is too tight, the sound is not good. If it's too loose, it's not good, right? So that's a very advice the Buddha already showed himself after his 6 years of austerity. Same thing. He practiced too intense, and that was too difficult. Then he decided to eat a little bit, right? So that means avoid extremes, because on the other side, if he eats too much, then of course it disturbs, right? So for us, our activity, same thing. If we enjoy life too much and hang out in the pub or hang out somewhere and try to have fun all the time, then of course that's not very constructive on the long term. Yeah. But on the other hand, if we're too tight, then the mind gets negative. If the mind gets negative, then we lose the interest and we think about negative about this kind of spiritual practices. And there's also an obstacle, right? So it's best to have a middle part, and sometimes you enjoy and that's what I learned a lot in the monastery. Tibetans are very good in working hard but being relaxed at the same time. And that's a skill you can develop, and that's a mental attitude that sits behind it, because whatever we do is originated in our mental attitude. So you have to have a midway approach. I mean, a few of my classmates, they got up so early, memorized, and went to bed late to recite. But on the Tuesday, it was a holiday, they go to town, have a nice meal, hang out, in the evening chatting for hours. But tomorrow it's full on again, So they know how to balance, That's for us very important, to balance our intensity. Of course, it's good to do the best, the things you do the best way you can, but you have to know yourself, and you have to know what are the limitations. And sometimes you need to relax, and that's what you do. Try to have a middle part, like the string of a guitar. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. And my last question is, what advice would you give to Westerners who are contemplating monastic vows? And would you have different advice for men and for women?
I mean, same advice I got when I was just into it. Make sure you have the right kind of motivation, and make sure you have making the right decision. It's kind of, a decision is quite a serious kind of change in life, right? Yeah. So that means you have to think about it quite well. And I'm being involved with ordinations, Westerners who took ordination with His Holiness, for example, for quite some years, in the process of screening the candidates and translating for ordination rituals, and giving a course about, the monastic way of life, including how to keep the vows, etc. But it's true, don't rush into ordination. Man or female is the same, right? You don't rush into it. And you have to know for sure what is your motivation behind it. And you have to know for sure what is, that you have studied, that you have a fundamental understanding of the Lamrim, because sometimes it's emotional. People think, and sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's because of ripening of positive imprints, right? So when you just get into Dharma, I saw the same thing happening, right? When you just get into the Dharma, positive karma ripens. So it's all beautiful, and the mind is a bit subdued, and now become monk, and then the mind is a bit subdued. But then a few years down the line, that karma can slowly finish, right? And then you see there are still things in the mind that was not there the last few years, right? So if you become monk and nun, doesn't mean you're perfect just by the ritual itself. Becoming monk or nun is very easy. It's just one day ritual, for an hour or so, and that's it. But to keep the vows is a different story, right? Or to stay ordained is a different story. So it's better to prepare well and then take the decision later in life and make sure you made the right decision. And you don't have to become a monk or nun. It's not a, some people as a layperson can also, we have many examples that in the tradition, that lay practitioners can also accomplish realizations, right? It's not, you don't have to, per definition, become monk or nun. Of course, there are benefits. That's been clearly explained, but it's not the suitable way for everybody, right? So it also has to be understood, and don't have to stress, I can become, I want to, and kind of, that also causes distress, So it's a gradual process, and those who have interest, that's very fortunate for them. Then you make sure you have the right motivation, you study well, talk with others who are ordained, see what the possibilities are, what do you want to do when you're ordained, and talk with people from the different, monks or nuns, and Yeah, there's no difference between male and female in that regard, because we have the same opportunities and the same possibilities. And now, thanks to the kinds of His Holiness, also the nuns, they can study in the same way. So it's amazing. So and in the West, we have different monastic institutions, and go have a look and see if that's your way of life or not. And otherwise, just remain a lay person. There's no issue with that. Yeah. But there are benefits, of course, in the ordained way of life. Many benefits. Yeah, but it's not mainly the subject of today. But there are many benefits like that. Yeah.
Geshe, thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
This was amazing. This was so smooth. This was so nice.
Okay.
Exactly. It was actually, 50 minutes more or less.
Okay.
Geshe, before we go, could we request you for a small dedication prayer for everyone who's listening, for the world who's suffering from COVID, for everyone basically?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a few prayers we normally do, but we can just summarize it. And that's one prayer of important for the spreading of these kind of teachings. Yeah, it's not only Buddhism, but teachings that brings benefit to the mind of human beings. Right? That's we can pray for as well. That's very important. If you're Buddhist or non-Buddhist, important. Then we can also pray for the long and healthy life of these spiritual leaders, including His Holiness Dalai Lama, for example, right? Or other spiritual leaders who bring great benefit to society. We can pray for that. And then eventually we pray for the development of all sentient beings to become a Buddha beyond all forms of suffering, right? That's or enlightened being. And then in order to come to that, then we pray for obstacles like COVID and obstacles that cause a lot of suffering to be removed or be eased or to be prevented in the future. Yeah, so that's kind of a few ways we can do. So maybe first the spreading of the Buddha teachings or all spiritual paths that brings benefits to humankind. Dagi jina sabe gewa di tendan towa ginda geba jazan lozan daba yitembe nimbo ringdu saje sho. And then for the spiritual teachers, including His Holiness, a long and healthy life, and all the wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. It actually includes everything, including all sufferings we are undergoing right now with COVID, etc. Yeah? So pray for that. The holy wishes of the gurus, especially His Holiness, to be fulfilled. Karera we gorwe singam so pendan dewa maru jongwe chere zegwan tenzin gyatsu japa shite patu thank you. Yeah, and then bodhicitta and emptiness, of course, the two pillars of our path to enlightenment, to come about in the minds of self and others without degeneration and increase. Chanjo, Sanjo, Rinpoche, Magye, Panam, Gigu, Kyeba, Nyamba, Meba, Yangone, Gonde, Belva, Toni, Tawa, Rinpoche, Magye, Panam, Gigu, Kyeba, Nyamba, Meba, Yangone, Gonde, Belva. Sure. And there's one verse by Tonton Gyalpo, one of the great masters in Tibet. He did a lot of good things for society, including building bridges and roads and hospitals and all kind of things. So there's one prayer referring to also COVID and all difficulties human beings are facing. So I read it in English for you. By invoking the power of loving kindness and compassion of Chenrezig, and to the force of making extensive prayers, may all sickness, war, fighting, famine be completely pacified, so that all beings have long, healthy, and happy lives. And so I think like that and try to pray for all those who lost their lives to be reborn in precious rebirth or in the Pure Lands, in either way achieve state of enlightenment. And those who are sick and ill, try to think that, or facing obstacles, try to think they get cured and obstacles get pacified. Yeah, and also try to think that all beings quickly progress in these stages of the path to enlightenment. And in this life and future lifetimes, they always be guided by a particular guide, as we call the spiritual friend. And then think in oneself, making the dedication itself, and the aim we pray towards too, is empty of inherent existence and the nature of dependent origination. And that's why these prayers also come true. Gewa Gunda Yanda Lama Dan Dame Chigi Bala Lanji Sadan Lamgi Yanda Razuni Doje Changi Koba Nimuto. All right. Thank you very much. Dhanabat. And yeah,
Thank you very much.
Very nice to meet one of my new friends in Bangalore. Yeah.
Thank you, Geshe. Thank you.
Mary, thank you very much for hosting from the US, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes, I'm a student in the basic program as well.
Yeah, so I realize that. Yeah.
Today. It's wonderful.
I think I saw your cat also a few times passing by.
Could be.
Yeah. All right.